There is a particular kind of pain that does not come from the body and cannot be explained by logic. You wake up with it. You carry it through the day. Nothing is wrong on the surface, yet something inside you aches, presses, whispers. You try to distract yourself, stay productive, stay strong, but the pain remains. Most people rush to silence this feeling. They label it weakness, stress, or failure. But what if this pain is not your enemy? What if it is a message, carefully constructed by a deeper part of you, that refuses to be ignored? The human mind has layers, and when the surface mind refuses to listen, the deeper mind speaks in discomfort. This speech is about learning to hear that message and understanding why the pain you cannot explain often appears at the most important turning points of your life. There is a peculiar kind of suffering that arrives without warning and refuses clear explanation. It is not sharp enough to be named, yet not faint enough to ignore. It lives beneath words, beneath rational justifications, beneath the carefully arranged story we tell ourselves about who we are and how our life is going. This pain often emerges not because something new has gone wrong, but because something old has been avoided for too long. The psyche has a way of keeping accounts, and what is left unpaid does not vanish. It accumulates interest in the form of inner tension. Much of this unexplained pain is born from unexpressed truth. There are thoughts we never allow to reach consciousness, desires we label as dangerous or unrealistic, emotions we decide are inappropriate for the person we believe we must be. We learn early how to adjust ourselves to expectations of family, society, culture, and slowly we begin to confuse adaptation with authenticity. Yet the parts of us that are silenced do not die. They withdraw into the unconscious, where they wait, gathering energy, seeking another way to be acknowledged. Consider the individual who has done everything right. They chose a respectable career, followed a predictable path, earned approval and stability. From the outside, their life appears ordered and successful. But internally, there is a persistent sense of restlessness. Mornings feel heavy. Small frustrations provoke disproportionate irritation. Anxiety arises without a clear cause. This person may say, "I don't know what's wrong. I should be grateful." But that very sentence reveals the conflict. The word "should" is often the language of repression. It replaces truth with obligation. Psychological research supports what inner experience has long revealed. Chronic emotional suppression is associated with elevated stress hormones, weakened immune response, depression, and burnout. The body and mind do not distinguish sharply between what is physical and what is psychological. What cannot be spoken is carried somatically. What cannot be lived consciously is suffered unconsciously. The pain, then, is not random. It is precise. It points to a misalignment between the life that is being lived and the life that wants to be lived. Pain becomes the language of the unspoken because the psyche seeks wholeness, not comfort. When truth is silenced, suffering speaks in its place. A denied longing may return as melancholy. A suppressed anger may appear as exhaustion or cynicism. A buried sense of meaninglessness may emerge as panic in moments of stillness. These symptoms are often treated as enemies to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Yet they are closer to messengers than to malfunctions. There is a reason the pain often intensifies when distraction fails, late at night, during quiet moments, or after external success has been achieved. When the noise of daily roles fades, the unconscious steps forward. It does not do this gently. It does not ask politely. It presses, disturbs, unsettles, not because it is cruel, but because it is older and wiser than the conscious ego, and it knows that continued denial leads not to safety, but to inner fragmentation. The tragedy is that many people respond to this pain by doubling down on the very life that caused it. They work harder, numb themselves with stimulation, convince themselves that the discomfort is weakness. But pain that is ignored does not dissolve. It deepens. It spreads. Eventually, it demands attention in ways that feel overwhelming: breakdowns, sudden despair, or the collapse of meaning itself. These moments are often labeled as failures, when in fact they are revelations. To listen to this pain requires courage. It means risking the loss of an identity that has provided security, even if it has also provided emptiness. It means admitting that something within you has been living in exile. This admission can feel frightening because it destabilizes the image you have maintained. But it is also profoundly relieving. For the first time, the suffering is given dignity. It is no longer meaningless noise. It becomes meaningful signal. When unexpressed truth is allowed into awareness, the pain begins to change. It may not disappear immediately, but it transforms from a tormentor into a guide. You begin to see that the discomfort was not trying to destroy your life, but to correct its direction. What was once experienced as anxiety becomes recognized as a call for authenticity. What felt like emptiness reveals itself as hunger for meaning. In this way, pain fulfills its hidden purpose. It restores dialogue between who you are and who you have been pretending to be. The psyche does not punish us for ignoring truth. It simply refuses to let us forget it. And when truth is finally allowed to speak, suffering no longer needs to raise its voice. There comes a moment in many lives when the forward motion suddenly breaks. What once felt certain begins to feel hollow. The strength that carried a person for years collapses without warning. Emotions rise that seem irrational, even embarrassing, and the mind scrambles to regain control. This interruption is often experienced as betrayal by the self, by life, by fate. Yet from a deeper psychological view, it is not a failure of the personality, but a correction initiated by the psyche itself. The unconscious does not communicate through logical debate or polite suggestion. It does not negotiate with the conscious mind, because the conscious mind is skilled at rationalizing its own habits. Instead, the unconscious speaks through emotion, through disturbance, through pain. When the identity we consciously inhabit becomes too narrow, too tightly bound to roles, expectations, or carefully maintained masks, the deeper layers of the psyche introduce friction. This friction is not accidental. It is intentional, though rarely understood in the moment. A person may build their entire sense of self around being strong, reliable, productive, and unbreakable. They become the one who holds everything together. They are admired, depended upon, and praised. Over time, this role hardens into identity. Weakness is denied. Vulnerability is exiled. Emotional needs are postponed indefinitely. For years, this may appear to work, but eventually, something breaks through. Exhaustion becomes overwhelming. Tears arrive without explanation. Motivation disappears. The collapse feels sudden, but it is anything but sudden. It is the accumulated weight of what was never allowed to be felt. The same interruption often appears after success. A lifelong goal is reached: financial stability, recognition, status, achievement. From the outside, this should be a moment of fulfillment. Yet many report an unexpected emptiness, a sense of disorientation, even depression. Psychological research on post-achievement depression confirms this pattern. When identity is built exclusively around external milestones, the attainment of the goal removes the structure that once gave life meaning. The question arises quietly but insistently: if this is it, then who am I now? The unconscious initiates pain at these moments not to punish, but to pause the momentum of a life that has become one-sided. Conscious identity, when overdeveloped in one direction, creates imbalance. The psyche, seeking wholeness, intervenes. Pain becomes the emergency brake. It stops the individual precisely where reflection is unavoidable. What feels like sabotage is actually an invitation, though one delivered in a language we were never taught to understand. Emotion, in this sense, is not weakness. It is intelligence. Anxiety interrupts certainty. Sadness interrupts speed. Confusion interrupts blind ambition. These states force the individual inward, away from constant performance and toward inquiry. Without such interruptions, many would live entire lives outwardly functional yet inwardly disconnected, never encountering the deeper dimensions of their own being. What makes this process so frightening is that it threatens the ego's sense of control. The ego believes stability comes from consistency, predictability, and coherence. The unconscious knows that growth often requires disruption, When the ego resists this disruption, labeling it pathology, failure, or weakness, the pain intensifies. When the ego listens, the pain begins to reveal its purpose. Consider how often people say, "I don't recognize myself anymore," during these periods. This is not a sign of disintegration alone, it is also a sign that the old self concept has reached its limits. The unconscious is not asking for destruction of the self, but for expansion. It demands a broader identity, one that includes softness alongside strength, uncertainty alongside competence, inner meaning alongside outer success. Pain, then, becomes the gateway to dialogue. It demands questions that were previously avoided. Why am I living this way? What part of me has been ignored? What am I afraid would happen if I stopped performing this role? These questions are uncomfortable because they destabilize familiar narratives, but they are also the questions that restore depth to life. When the interruption is honored rather than resisted, a shift occurs. The individual no longer sees pain as an enemy to be eliminated, but as a signal to be interpreted. This does not make the experience easy, but it makes it meaningful. The psyche no longer needs to shout because it is finally being heard. In this way, pain fulfills its psychological function. It interrupts the life that is too small for the soul that inhabits it. It halts forward motion long enough for truth to catch up, and though the interruption may feel like a breakdown, it is often the first moment in which a person is invited to live more fully, more honestly, and more whole than before. There is a quiet law operating within the human psyche that few are taught to recognize. What you refuse to face within yourself does not disappear, it reorganizes itself into suffering. The mind is not a space where unwanted qualities can be permanently exiled. Fear, anger, sensitivity, longing, vulnerability, these traits are not errors in the design of the human being. Yet many people spend their lives trying to amputate these parts of themselves in order to appear strong, acceptable, or in control. What follows is not freedom, but a subtler form of imprisonment. From early life, we learn which aspects of ourselves are rewarded and which are punished. We are praised for composure, productivity, resilience, and obedience. We are discouraged from expressing anger, sadness, uncertainty, or need. Slowly, we begin to divide ourselves. The acceptable parts are allowed into awareness. The unacceptable parts are pushed into darkness. This division creates what might be called an inner shadow, not evil, but unlived life. Everything we deny ourselves gathers there, charged with emotional energy. The shadow does not announce itself directly. It operates indirectly, influencing moods, behaviors, relationships, and even physical health. A person who denies their anger may pride themselves on being calm and reasonable, yet carry constant tension in their body. Their jaw tightens, their shoulders ache, their patience wears thin over small things. Resentment builds quietly, leaking out as sarcasm or emotional distance. The anger they refuse to feel consciously now controls them unconsciously. Another person may reject vulnerability entirely. They present themselves as independent, composed, and unaffected. They are admired for their self-sufficiency. Yet beneath this image is a profound loneliness. Even surrounded by people, they feel unseen. They crave intimacy but cannot tolerate the exposure it requires. The vulnerability they disown now returns as isolation. The psyche has not eliminated the need, it has merely changed its form. Clinical psychology repeatedly confirms this pattern. Emotional suppression is associated with increased anxiety, depression, and stress-related illness. Integration, acknowledging and accepting emotional experience, leads to psychological resilience and well-being. What heals is not the elimination of difficult emotions, but the willingness to relate to them consciously. The mind does not suffer because it contains darkness. It suffers because that darkness is denied. What is resisted internally seeks expression externally. A person who disowns their own aggression may experience the world as hostile, surrounded by angry people. Someone who denies their own fear may feel perpetually threatened by circumstances. The psyche projects what it cannot contain. In this way, life begins to feel persecutory, not because the world has changed, but because the individual is running from a part of themselves. The pain that arises from this process often feels mysterious. It appears as anxiety with no clear cause, sadness without a story, irritability without justification. People ask, "Why do I feel this way when nothing is wrong?" The answer is that something within is wrong, not broken, but unheard. The rejected part of the psyche is knocking from the inside, not to destroy the house, but to be invited back in. This knocking grows louder the longer it is ignored. At first, it may be a quiet discomfort. Later, it becomes distress. Eventually, it may erupt as crisis. The psyche is patient, but it is persistent. It would rather disturb your peace than allow you to live divided from yourself. What feels like sabotage is often self-preservation at a deeper level. To meet the shadow requires humility. It means admitting that the traits you most dislike in yourself may contain essential life energy. Anger may protect boundaries. Sensitivity may deepen connection. Fear may signal what truly matters. Vulnerability may open the door to intimacy and meaning. These qualities become destructive only when they are forced underground. When a person turns toward what they have resisted, something remarkable happens. The energy trapped in repression is released. The symptoms lose their grip. Anxiety softens into alertness. Sadness becomes depth. Anger becomes clarity. The psyche begins to function as a whole rather than as a battlefield. This does not mean indulging every impulse or abandoning responsibility. Integration is not surrender to chaos. It is relationship with inner truth. It is the capacity to say, "This too belongs to me." In that acknowledgement, the inner war ends. The suffering you experience is often not evidence of weakness, but of division. It is the cost of living partially. When the rejected parts of the self are welcomed back into awareness, pain no longer needs to scream. It speaks softly, and sometimes it falls silent altogether, not because it was defeated, but because it was finally understood. There is a widespread misunderstanding about pain that quietly shapes how people interpret their most vulnerable moments. When inner stability dissolves, when certainty weakens, when the familiar self no longer fits, the immediate conclusion is often that something has gone wrong. The language of failure rushes in. Yet from a deeper psychological perspective, these moments of inner disturbance are rarely signs of collapse. More often, they are signals of transition, indications that an old structure of the self has reached its natural limit. Across cultures and throughout history, periods of intense psychological discomfort have marked the passages from one stage of life to another. Adolescence is not only a biological change but a psychological upheaval filled with confusion, emotional volatility, and identity conflict. Midlife often brings a profound reckoning, where achievements lose their power to satisfy and long, suppressed questions rise to the surface. Loss shatters assumptions about permanence and control. Awakening disrupts the narratives that once provided certainty. These experiences are not accidents, they are thresholds. And thresholds, by their nature, are unstable places to stand. Anthropological studies of rites of passage reveal a striking pattern. Before a new role or identity is assumed, the old one must be symbolically dissolved. This dissolution is rarely comfortable. It is marked by disorientation, vulnerability, and a sense of being between worlds. The individual is no longer who they were, but not yet who they will become. Structure is temporarily removed. Familiar markers of identity disappear. In traditional societies, this period was recognized, ritualized, and supported. In modern life, it is often pathologized and rushed. The psyche follows a similar pattern. When an identity has fulfilled its purpose, it begins to loosen. The beliefs, roles, and self-images that once provided coherence start to feel constraining or empty. This loosening is experienced as anxiety, sadness, confusion, or emotional rawness. Because the ego depends on structure, it interprets this instability as danger. Yet the deeper psyche recognizes it as necessary. No genuine transformation occurs without first passing through uncertainty. The fear of this in-between state is understandable. Structure gives the illusion of safety. When it dissolves, the mind searches desperately for something solid to hold on to. But the absence of structure is not the absence of meaning. It is the space in which new meaning can emerge. Potential does not appear fully formed. It gestates in ambiguity. If you feel lost, it may be because the map you have been using no longer applies. If you feel emotionally exposed, it may be because the defenses that once protected you have outlived their usefulness. If you feel internally unstable, it may be because the foundation you stood upon was never meant to support the next stage of your life. These experiences do not indicate personal inadequacy. They indicate movement. One of the most painful aspects of transition is the loss of familiar identity. People often say, "I don't know who I am anymore." This statement carries fear, but also truth. The old self is dissolving, and the new one has not yet taken shape. The psyche resists premature definition. It asks for patience. To rush into a new identity too quickly is to repeat the old pattern with a different mask. In psychological development, this period of not knowing is essential. It allows previously unconscious material to rise. New values begin to form. Priorities shift. What once seemed important loses urgency, and what was ignored begins to demand attention. This is not regression, it is reorientation. The psyche is reorganizing itself around a deeper center. Many people attempt to escape this phase by clinging to productivity, distraction, or familiar roles. Others seek quick answers, formulas, or identities that promise immediate relief. While these strategies may reduce discomfort temporarily, they often delay transformation. Pain persists not because the transition is wrong, but because it has been interrupted. To endure this threshold requires a different kind of strength, not the strength of control, but the strength of presence. It requires the ability to remain with uncertainty without immediately resolving it, to listen without rushing to conclude, to trust that the psyche knows where it is going, even when the conscious mind does not. What is ending may be a way of living that no longer reflects your inner reality, a belief about who you must be, a role you have outgrown, a story that once made sense but now feels hollow. The pain marks the moment of release, and though release feels like loss, it is also an opening. Transitions do not announce their outcomes in advance. They only ask that you step forward without guarantees. Yet it is precisely through these unstructured spaces that the psyche renews itself. What feels like disintegration is often preparation. What feels like confusion is often incubation. And what feels like failure may be the quiet, necessary ending that makes a more authentic beginning possible. There is a decisive moment in the inner life when suffering either deepens into despair or begins to reveal its meaning. This moment does not come from eliminating pain, but from listening to it. As long as pain is treated as an intruder, something to be silenced, medicated, distracted from, or overcome, it grows louder. It repeats itself in new forms. It infiltrates relationships, work, sleep, and identity. But the moment the question shifts from, "How do I make this stop?" to, "What is this asking of me?" the relationship with pain fundamentally changes. Pain intensifies when ignored because it is not merely sensation, it is communication. The psyche does not create suffering without purpose. When words fail, pain becomes the language through which the unconscious demands attention. What we refuse to hear gently, we are forced to hear loudly. This is why avoidance never works for long. The unconscious is patient, but it is persistent. It will return to the same theme again and again until the message is received. Most people are trained to treat discomfort as a malfunction. From an early age, we learn to suppress what is unpleasant and reward what is acceptable. We become efficient at functioning, but inexperienced at listening. As adults, we often approach pain with hostility or fear, assuming it is proof of weakness or failure. Yet pain is not the opposite of meaning. More often, it is the threshold to it. When a person begins to listen inwardly, something subtle but powerful occurs. Pain no longer feels like a chaotic force attacking from nowhere. It begins to take shape. It reveals patterns. One starts to notice when it arises, what intensifies it, and what quiets it. This observation alone introduces a new element into the psyche, consciousness. And where consciousness enters, transformation becomes possible. Practices such as journaling, reflection, therapy, and deep solitude are not escapes from life. They are acts of courage. They are deliberate invitations to dialogue with the unconscious, to sit alone with one's thoughts, to write honestly without censorship, to speak openly to another human being. These acts expose inner material that has long remained hidden. Psychological research on expressive writing consistently shows measurable improvements in emotional clarity, reduced stress, and greater psychological integration when people give language to their internal experience. What was once overwhelming becomes understandable. What was once oppressive becomes interpretable. Giving words to pain does not weaken it, it humanizes it. Pain without language feels endless and tyrannical. Pain with language becomes finite and relational. It can be questioned, explored, and understood. Often, what emerges is not a single answer, but a deeper awareness of unmet needs, denied truths, or unlived values. The pain was never meaningless, it was directional. Listening also requires patience. The unconscious does not reveal itself all at once. It speaks in symbols, moods, images, and recurring themes. It asks for time and humility. This is why quick fixes so often fail. They attempt to end the conversation before it has properly begun. The psyche does not respond to force, it responds to attention. When the message carried by pain is finally acknowledged, a noticeable shift occurs. The pain may not vanish completely, but it softens. It no longer needs to dominate awareness because its purpose has been fulfilled. Like a messenger who has delivered the letter, it steps back. Life does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes coherent. Suffering is no longer arbitrary. It is contextualized within a larger narrative of growth. Many people fear that listening to pain will overwhelm them. In reality, it is resistance that exhausts the psyche. Listening conserves energy. It aligns inner experience rather than fragmenting it. The individual begins to feel less at war with themselves. Inner conflict gives way to inner conversation. This does not mean indulging suffering or romanticizing pain. It means respecting its intelligence. Pain is not asking to be worshipped, but to be understood. It wants recognition, not obedience. When this recognition is given, the psyche no longer needs to shout through symptoms, crises, or breakdowns. It can speak in quieter, more nuanced ways. Meaning is not imposed on pain from the outside. It emerges from relationship with it. And meaning, once found, has a stabilizing effect on the soul. A person who understands why they suffer can endure far more than one who believes their pain is random or pointless. In this way, listening becomes an act of transformation. Pain is no longer a curse to be escaped, but a guide pointing toward wholeness. And when the psyche is finally heard, suffering loses its urgency, not because it was defeated, but because it was answered. The pain you can't explain is not a flaw in you. It is intelligence. It is the deeper self insisting on growth, truth, and wholeness. If you have the courage to listen rather than numb, to explore rather than escape, you may discover that this pain arrived not to break you, but to lead you back to yourself.